There were some that questioned, would hockey work here? That's a funny question. 2018 to now, it has been such a marvelous love affair. We welcome in the commissioner of the National Hockey League.
You know what I did at 11 o'clock last night?
What was that?
I went to the Neon Museum.
Oh, I saw that.
Quintessential Las Vegas. It was great.
Nice.
Now that I gave them a plug.
The playoffs have been, and we'll narrow the focus eventually to the Cup final, but these playoffs have been what you always talk about. Competitive balance, road teams. This has been a thrill to watch.
Come from behind victories. You never know how a game's going to end. Somewhere over 40% of our games, maybe the second most in our history, come from behind victories. It's about being entertaining for our fans. It's about having fun. It's about letting speed and skill predominate. And as importantly, the players are having fun. And the competitive balance is extraordinary. I mean, there's really nothing like, when you look particularly at our first round, but our playoffs overall, there's nothing like it in sports.
No,
there's not. When we sit there and look at some of the new blood, if you will, the Florida Panthers, that great story that they're doing this year, and new blood as far as being in the finals. I spoke to a GM last year, and he kind of explained to me some interesting things, because I was always thinking that teams' playoff gates meant so much, and they do, but it was more about what was explained to me what that means for season ticket sales and the growth of their fan base from year to year. Can you speak on maybe from that standpoint what a deep run means?
Based on the way the revenues are allocated, whether it's to revenue sharing or funding the playoffs, funding the playoff pool, it's not a huge windfall. Yeah, you can make some good money if you go the distance, but what it does is it cements your franchise for generations. People who are fans remember this moment, remember this experience. People who are casual sports fans will tune in when their local team is playing. And without regard to the markets, because people say, oh, what does it mean that no northern climate, that there are newer teams? At the end of the day, and it goes to the first question that we discussed, it's about the hockey. And the hockey has been sensational, and that's what will enable the game to grow. But yes, if you're in a run like this, you're a franchise that's cementing your future for years to come. Yeah, you'll sell more season tickets for next season, but you'll have generations of fans who will remember this moment.
And Vegas was special for that reason, that first year in 2018. But even Seattle now.
But you remember Vegas, this was a city in search of an identity beyond the Strip. Right. The people who live here, the 2.5 million in Metro Las Vegas and Clark County, they don't identify with the Strip the way tourists do, and they were looking for this unifying thing that signaled that they were like every other major city, that this was the largest city, I think, at the time that didn't have one of the 4 major sports. And there were a lot of people who were skeptical. There were a lot of people who ridiculed us at the time, and now everybody thinks they invented it and that this is the place to be. But going back to the interest, you may not remember this, but a year before Vegas played their first game, I came out here to participate in the announcement of the team name. 5,000 people showed up just to hear the name of the team, because people wanted to be here at the beginning of something that was being born and raised here in Vegas.
Something they could claim as their own.
As their own.
When you were making that decision about Vegas, now it's turned out brilliantly. You were ahead of the curve. We were first. NHL was here first. Everyone else is coming, but you guys were here first. Did you think
at the time, not everybody else was coming.
Everyone's coming now, but at the time you're thinking, well, if they come, if it's going to go that direction, it's better to be earlier than late?
No, it was. I had been interested, and we as a league had been interested for years. The issue was there was no arena. Mm-hmm. And once the arena was coming out of the ground, it changed the whole dynamic in terms of what our interest was and how we might proceed going forward. So this was always a place I had my eye on. But again, it wasn't my decision. It was the Board of Governors.
Right. I also think that there's a tremendous amount of credit that should be given to the structure for Vegas and for Seattle, that they were able to compete from the beginning.
Well, you know, we went through a tough time a decade and a half ago to get the system that gives us economic sanity, fair sharing with the players, revenue sharing, and most importantly, competitive balance, which opened the game up and has enabled the game on the ice to thrive the way it was. but the notion was, when you looked at the history of expansion in all sports, the history was you charge a lot of money and you give a mediocre team, and the initial enthusiasm wears off in 3 years or 4 years of losing, and then at the end of the decade, the team gets competitive. Well, we have a system where all teams can be competitive. And so the notion was, why bring in a team that would go through that historic experience, and why have a team in the league that couldn't be competitive when all the other teams can? And the Board of Governors were great in terms of focusing on that issue.
So on that note, I'm sure you and Deputy Commish Bill Daly field calls about a million different things, and I know the word on the street is all these different places want another franchise, an expansion team. How much it's got to be due to the success and the branding that these two markets have made with Seattle and Vegas, right?
I think that's part of it. I think part of it is the health of the game. On and off the ice, we have over 70 league-wide sponsors. We have a system where everybody can compete with economic sanity. We have the best media distribution that we've ever had in our history. And the league, again, both on and off the ice, has never been better, has never been stronger, and our ownership has never been stronger. And that enables us to do a lot of things like invest and reinvest, whether it's digitally enhanced dashboards, puck and player tracking, doing things with Disney like Big City Green, where we did the animated game. We're trying to find ways to be on the cutting edge with our fans in terms of how they can connect with the game without disturbing the game. It's everything we're doing is taking a great game with the best athletes in the world and figuring out ways to bring our fans closer to it.
Didn't those digital dashboards win an award, an Emmy? Or
Yeah, it did. They won technological
Well
breakthrough of the
deserved.
year.
Congrats to the NHL. Now, talking about best on best, is the
That's
best.
very
in
good.
NHL?
You pay attention to
Well,
that stuff.
occasionally I read stuff. Occasionally. Best on best is something the players
Yeah.
are interested in.
As are we.
Yeah, absolutely. As people remind, the players are supposed to be in the last Olympics if we're not for the COVID situation.
Yeah,
So, international calendar, Marty Walsh, new PA head in there. Any kind of updates on where that might be?
We've begun the dialogue. We're going to start having meetings. Obviously, we've got a reboot with the new administration at the Players Association, and the world over the last year or so has gotten increasingly complicated in terms of how international competitions and who participates is run, and that's something we have to take into account. As it relates to the Olympics, we know it's important to the players. We'd like to go. There's a little issue of, as in the past, who's going to pay for the cost of insurance, of transportation, of accommodating the players' families, which is something historically that the International Olympic Committee, the organizing committee, and the International Ice Hockey Federation have all paid. And if they're going to pay and we can arrange it, we want to go. But if they're telling us that we're not going to pay, that tells us there isn't enough interest in having us. My hope is everybody steps up so that we can do this. Again, I know, and you've heard me say for years how disruptive it can be for our season, but we know it's important to the players and important to our fans, so we're going to try and make it happen.
There is about you a modesty where you won't bring this up, but I, like Johnny, have prepared. I read Lifetime Achievement Award, Sports Business Journal. All the accolades, Hall of Fame and all that stuff aside, because I know you don't want to talk about that. In your role as
But we're going to do it anyway, apparently.
I'm trying to weave
Here it
that
comes.
in, but then get to, because you're like a hockey person, you want to talk about the team. For your team, the behind the scenes and all the stuff that goes on, what's the most rewarding part of a Stanley Cup final?
For me?
And for those that you
Well,
work alongside?
Actually, I get the greatest honor of all, and that's to present the most iconic, historic trophy in all of sports. It's a trophy. I know I say this and sound silly. It actually has a charisma. You know, you put it in a room with people and you can't believe the reaction. And actually, as a big a deal as it has always been for me, last year I really realized it more because I didn't get to do it because I had COVID. And I didn't think it was a good idea to violate the protocols we had been enforcing for 2 years in a very public way. Bill Daly did a great job last year filling in, but you know, there's nothing like it's the Stanley Cup. And also, and Mike, both of you would appreciate this, I get the most interesting perspective because I'm on the ice this close to the players, and in terms of the raw emotion that I get to see that close and the feeling of ecstasy that the players get from this accomplishment, doesn't get any better than that as a sports fan.
Yes.
We might need to put a body cam on you. That's some nice footage. That's some nice footage for everybody to see from that.
It's incredible.
Though I want to ask you, in the grand scheme of dating back to when Johnny and I were playing early 2000s, we had some rule changes, and the game where it's at now, I don't think has ever been better, more skilled. But the thing I love about it too is it's still hockey. There's still it's a contact sport. It's a safer league, much safer league.
Yes.
How is that? Where are you at now when you look at it as a whole? Because some of the traditionalists, I think, are still very happy that it's still that game. But then it's kind of this new crowd and the new fan. It loves the skill that we're seeing right now.
I think we've finally, and it took time, and we had a lot of great collaboration. Our hockey operations people, the general managers, the coaches, the Players Association. We have a competition committee which is jointly administered. And I think over time, with the fact that all teams could be competitive, enabled us to open up the game. And we're always focused on player safety and player health and well-being. And I think we've gotten to the right balance. Having said that, the Department of Player Safety, as well as the Hockey Operations Department, is watching every minute of every game, and we're looking for trends to make sure that if we have to adjust the dial a little, that we're doing it. But, you know, if you go back to the early 2000s, before we had the year off, when you saw the Stanley Cup final, the last one we played before the year-long lockout, first team to score a goal won the game, was over. Because what we saw throughout the year was you had teams, some teams with payrolls 4 or 5 times the payrolls of other teams, and the only way the less well-endowed teams could compete was to neutralize skill, clutch and grab and hook and hold. The fact that everybody can compete enabled us to get that out of the game, and at the same time, with the medical studies that have been done and the input that we get, trying to make sure the game's as safe as possible.
You stay on top of all things hockey, of course, that is your job, but just curious, your dialogue with players, like individual players, not the Players Association, you do have chances to talk and, and go out of your way to make sure to pick the brains of all the different players, whether it's Connor McDavid or Mike Johnson. You find a way to kind of pick their brains at different times?
It's why I try and get to games in every building throughout the league. It's different everywhere, and I like getting the input. I was in Edmonton. I had a nice chat with Connor about, tell me what we can do to make the skills competition at All-Star better. Let's begin that dialogue. I mean, because the feedback that I can get by being around the league, by talking to players, by being at the general managers' meetings, by talking to coaches, and talking to owners and business executives, gives me more of the pulse of the league. You can't do this job remotely from New York. I've got to be able to get out and about, and, you know, I do that. And there are people who say my travel schedule is insane, but to me, that's part of what I should be doing. And frankly, I love to do, because I get to see games everywhere.
The game's never been better, and on behalf of all hockey fans, we thank you and your team. We're loving it.
Well, thanks for all you guys do. You do a great job of covering the game for us. Thank you.